This is my story. With all due respect, I never asked anyone to tell me whether they believe it or not. I only ask that they listen to what I have to say because this is my mission. And I want to thank everyone for all the support and positive message I've received so far. For more than 50 years, I have watched the image of Marilyn Monroe enrich thousands of people without the slightest discomfort or restraint. I have seen slander and rumors transformed into scenes in movies and documentaries that never happened. I've heard lies repeated until they were treated as absolutely truth. I do not care in the least about the billions earned through this image, but I'm certain of two things. First, these people never loved Marilyn Monroe. And second, these actions are deeply disrespectful. I sincerely hope they make excellent use of it, and that they also practice charity towards those in need. But this is my story, and no one has the right to take it away from me. To understand any truth, one must go beyond the surface. Think deeply, question, doubt what is presented as finished and unquestionable. Those who think superficially, who accept the first version offered by the tabloids as if it were truth served on a silver platter, never understood who Marilyn Monroe truly was. And they will continue not to understand what is being discussed here. History demands maturity. It demands time. It demands a world willing to listen. There are truths that cannot be spoken before those who carry them are ready and before society is capable of facing them without distortion. Some narratives must remain safeguarded, not out of weakness, but out of responsibility. It cannot be ignored that from the late 1970s onwards, Marilyn Monroe's story began to be examined from new perspectives, including by scholars from different countries. When fragments of interpretation spread without context, rumors arise, distortions multiply, and empty appropriations take form. Versions without depth, without foundation, without commitment to historical truth. Those who truly care do not accept fragile, sensationalist accounts devoid of historical, material, or scientific grounding. Those who care question, investigate, move closer to complexity. That is something many still fail to understand. Lives matter. When a single human being falls into the abyss, something in all of us falls as well. When a single human being rises, something in all of us rises too. Understanding Marilyn Monroe is not idolization. It is an exercise in historical consciousness. And above all, one must remember this. No one can be understood outside the time in which they live it. For that reason, I will introduce you the world that Marilyn Monroe lived in.
Throughout the history of civilization, the image of women has been systematically reduced, distorted, and blamed for the evils of the world, as if the feminine carried an original guilt within itself. From the biblical narrative that turns Eve into the cause of Adam's fall, erasing male free will and converting women into a symbol of error, to the violent persecution of so-called witches, the feminine was treated as a threat to social control. Many of these women were not agents of evil, but carriers of intelligence, philosophical thought, ancestral knowledge, and in-depth knowledge about herbs, healing, and caring for life. That's why they were defamed, demonized, and eliminated. Because knowing too much, healing too much, or thinking too much has always been dangerous for power structures that rely on ignorance. The exclusion of women from priestly positions in religious institutions reveals an ancestral fear of feminine spiritual power. While, on the material plane, feminicide exposed the crudest face of this historical heritage. The woman's body is still seen as a possession, as a territory to be dominated or punished. Thus, the devaluation of women is not an accident of history, but a cultural project supported by myths, dogmas, and violence that span the centuries, silencing what could balance humanity itself. Just as in the past, so toward the decades of the 1940s, 1950s, and part of the 1960s. To be a woman meant living in a world of limitations, many of them silent, normalized, and imposed daily. Female freedom was carefully monitored, reduced to the domestic sphere, and shaped by rigid expectations of obedience, purity, and submission, as if a woman's worth were conditioned on her ability to serve and silence herself. Dreams, intellectual desires, and personal ambitions were often treated as dangerous deviations or signs of moral inadequacy, while emotional and economic dependence was romanticized as a virtue. In this period, oppression rarely appeared as explicit violence. Instead, it manifested in a more insidious form, disguised as tradition, duty, and good manners, teaching generations of women to doubt themselves and to accept an existence smaller than the one they were capable of living. For Black women, those limitations were even more profound. In the United States, there was no federal law explicitly forbidding women from having bank accounts. On paper, that right existed. In practice, however, banks frequently refused to serve women, particularly married women, without the authorization of a husband or a male relative. It was not illegal to prevent them, it was socially accepted. Upon marriage, many women lost even more autonomy. In several states, the legal doctrine known as coverture was in force. treating married women as legal dependents of their husbands. Even when working and earning income, the money could cease to belong to them. As a result, many women were paid in cash, by checks cashed by male relatives, or through joint accounts under male control. They worked, but they did not decide. Nurses represent one of the greatest paradoxes of that era. During the Second World War and the post-war period, they were essential to keeping lives, hospitals, and communities functioning. Even so, many had no control of their own wages. They cared for the lives of others, without full authority over their own. For Black women, exclusion was twofold: gender and race. Under racial segregation laws known as Jim Crow, separation was explicit and humiliating. In many workplaces, Black people were forbidden from using the same lavatories as white people. They could only use a lavatory if a specific sign was present, and those signs stated clearly and cruelly, "Colored only," or "for colored people." The same applied to public spaces, drinking fountains, entrances, waiting rooms. On public transport, Black women were often forced to stand even after paying their fare. In 1955, a Black woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. That simple and profoundly courageous act sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, a landmark in the civil rights movement. After this mobilization, Black passengers were permitted to sit in the rear seats of buses when they were empty, a minimal right achieved only after decades of humiliation. Exclusion also affected poor people, regardless of race. Poverty was treated as a moral failing, not a social condition. Government support was limited, and society regarded the poor with suspicion, contempt, and constant surveillance. To be poor meant less access to healthcare, less access to justice, less voice, less social value. There was also another group persecuted in silence: gay men and lesbians. During the 1940s and 1950s, LGBTQIA+ individuals were viewed by the state as a moral and political threat. Many were dismissed from their jobs, particularly in public service. Their names were placed on surveillance lists, known as threat or risk lists. A suspicion was enough, an accusation, a rumor. Losing one's job meant losing everything, with no right to defense, no legal protection, no recognition. All of this reveals a hard truth. Rights were never distributed equally. They were controlled by those who held power. For decades, women, Black people, the poor, and LGBTQIA+ individuals sustained society through their labor, presence, and resistance. Yet, they were treated as incomplete citizens. These changes only began to take hold from the 1960s and 1970s onwards, through social, civil, and human rights movements. Rights that now appear self-evident were won through courage, loss, and resistance. This history is not merely about laws, buses, or lavatories. It is about dignity, belonging, and the right to exist fully. beyond the widespread persecution of individual human rights. The system in place also worked to suppress human progress itself. Scientists and researchers who sought to advance humanity through science and technology were likewise silenced. Like Thomas Henry Murray, for instance, developed the radiant energy device, capable of generating electricity without any external energy source. This project was denied recognition and deliberately suppressed. Edwin Gray created the Bose capacitor discharge electric engine, a device that could produce a significant amount of energy using only a single battery. Yet, his work was marginalized and obstructed. Even the renowned Nikola Tesla had his research confiscated by the US government following his death. Those are few examples among many people suppressed. Any attempt at genuine social or scientific progress that threatened existing power structures had to be controlled, dominated, or erased by the ruling forces of the time. To understand the world in which Marilyn Monroe lived, imagine a society built upon absolute control, where almost everything was decided before a woman ever spoke. Imagine a world in which the money was not yours, the body was not yours, the image was not yours, and the voice was only accepted if it was obedient. In that world, it was not necessary to shout in order to be considered a threat. It was enough simply not to obey completely. Marilyn Monroe lived in an era in which women were trained to please, not to choose. Beauty was permitted. Desirability was acceptable. But wanting something beyond that was dangerous. When Marilyn asked for better contracts, when she wanted to study acting seriously, when she demanded professional respect, when she attempted to control her own image, this was not seen as growth, it was seen as rebellion. Because within that system, a woman who thinks is inconvenient, a woman who questions is suspicious, and a woman who recognizes her own worth is a threat. Now imagine this layered onto everything already described in this video. In such a world, any deviation from the expected role was treated as a social risk. Marilyn did not need to do anything extreme. The simple act of wanting to be more than a symbol was enough to break invisible rules. She lived within a system that accepted women as images, but not as subjects. That's why the smallest gesture of autonomy seemed excessive. That's why the desire for dignity appeared threatening. That's why her fragility was exploited, and her strength was punished. Marilyn Monroe was not an accident of history. She was a reflection of a world that did not know what to do with a woman who did not fit the mold it had created. And understanding this is essential, because sometimes the true revolution is not what someone does, but the simple fact of existing outside the place assigned to them. The contracts Marilyn Monroe signed in the early years of Hollywood were not an exception. They were the rule. Contracts that forbade the actress from expressing herself publicly, from responding to or denying rumors, from questioning studio decisions, and even from controlling her own image. These contracts were not regarded as cruel at the time. They were considered normal within a system deeply rooted in sexism, run almost exclusively by men with economic, political, and media power. Marilyn did not own her own narrative. She was contractual property. Any attempt to defend herself, to explain, or to take a position was treated as a breach of discipline, and this is where the true historical rupture begins. When Marilyn began demanding better roles, when she chose to pursue serious acting training, when she halted productions to renegotiate unfair contracts, when she founded her own production company, she was not merely defending herself. She was challenging the entire structure of Hollywood. For women, her gestures, even when small or imperfect, carried revolutionary meaning. They demonstrated that it was possible to say no, that it was possible to demand respect, that it was possible to want more than the decorative role assigned. She showed that beauty and intelligence were not opposites, that a woman could be desired and still seek control over her life and her work. For Hollywood and its businessmen, Marilyn represented a dangerous precedent. If she could negotiate, others might try. If she could halt a production, others might demand rights. If she could control her image, the system would lose its monopoly. Her behavior was therefore not interpreted as courage, but as economic and institutional threat. Hollywood did not fear Marilyn as a person. It feared the domino effect. She was seen as a threat because she shattered the system's core contradictions. She embodied idealized femininity while rejecting silent submission. She appeared fragile while acting with awareness. She came from poverty and dared to confront millionaires. In a world where women were expected to be grateful for being chosen, Marilyn chose herself, and that was unforgivable. The press of that era was largely controlled by men, by studio allies, and by conservative political and economic interests. It was not neutral. It protected the system. Obedient women were celebrated. Questioning women were ridiculed. Rumors were planted. Silences were enforced. Reputations were shaped or destroyed. For decades, women who challenged husbands, rejected social roles, expressed anger, grief, or dissatisfaction, or simply did not conform, were labeled unstable, hysterical, or problematic. Many were sent to psychiatric institutions without genuine diagnosis. Confinement functioned as social punishment. It was not treatment, it was silencing. An institutionalized woman lost credibility, rights, voice, and often her own history. Once associated with madness, she no longer needed to be heard. Marilyn Monroe was not merely an actress. She was a historical point of tension. She exposed the fractures of a system that accepted women as images, but not as conscious beings. That is why she was attacked. That is why she was discredited. That's why she was monitored, controlled, and punished. She did not threaten the world with violence. She threatened it with something far more dangerous to power: awareness. Understanding this is not idolization. It is historical memory. because many women paid dearly for attempting to live beyond the role imposed upon them, and Marilyn Monroe was one of the most visible among them. Marilyn Monroe's story was never told from within the world she inhabited. History was told without context. Today, we are invited to examine it closely: the world, the power, the system. And in doing so, we discover that Marilyn Monroe was not a victim of chance, but a strategic woman confronting a global structure on her own. Before judging Marilyn Monroe, one must understand the world that tried to silence her. History never asked what kind of world Marilyn Monroe lived in. Today we ask. And when we look closely, we realize it was not Marilyn who failed the system, but the system that could not withstand her strength.